All right, so have you ever, wished you could like zoom in and see the world, at a microscopic level?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, it seems scientists are getting us closer and closer to that, that kind of superpower.
It's really remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, today's source material is an article called "Scientists Just Discovered a Hidden Superpower in Microscopes, Thanks to AI."
Catchy title.
Yeah, it is right.
I like
It
it.
was published just this week by Helmholtz Zentrum Dresden-Rossendorf. And it lays out a pretty fascinating new technique,
Yeah.
basically combining physics and AI to see things that we, never thought possible.
Yeah, it's fascinating how those two fields can work together,
Yeah.
like to enhance what we can observe.
Right. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, I think it's worth touching upon, kind of the limitations of traditional microscopy.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know the basics, but, what makes this a field that's ripe for disruption?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head that, traditional microscopy usually involves labeling samples with dyes or fluorescent markers.
Right.
And so, imagine trying to study a delicate ecosystem or a cell or something, and to see anything, you first have to douse it in paint.
Yeah.
You might miss details or even alter the very environment you're trying to look at.
Right. And that's not even considering the cost and the time of all that.
Exactly.
So what's the alternative?
Well, this is where quantitative phase imaging, or QPI, comes in.
Okay.
And instead of relying on dyes, QPI analyzes how light waves are altered as they pass through a sample.
Okay.
It's kind of like listening to a song as it travels through different rooms. The sound changes, giving you clues about the space it's moving through.
I like that.
QPI does the same thing with light. So, it lets us see the structure and composition of a sample without needing all those labels.
So instead of relying on, injecting something foreign into it, you're actually just looking at how the light changes. Okay. But even then, I mean, just relying on those phase shifts to create an image, I imagine that creates its own set of challenges.
Right.
How does QPI address that?
So conventional QPI often requires multiple images taken at different focal planes, like trying to understand a three-dimensional object by looking at a bunch of two-dimensional slices.
Right.
But, that takes time, and it can be tricky, especially for, dynamic samples.
Especially in like a biological setting, right, where things are constantly moving.
Exactly.
Right.
You want to look at it, in real time. So
Right. So it sounds like they needed a way to simplify the process.
Yeah.
Is that where this new technique comes in?
That's where it comes in, and it's remarkable what they did because they did it by harnessing something that most lens makers consider a flaw, and that's chromatic aberration.
Chromatic aberration. Okay.
So you know how a prism splits white light into a rainbow?
Yeah.
That's chromatic aberration, different wavelengths of light focus at slightly different points.
Right.
And so they use this to their advantage. They use this flaw to their advantage.
So how on earth did they turn a flaw into a feature?
Think of it like this, using a prism to split light into a rainbow.
Okay.
Each color focuses at a slightly different point.
Right.
This technique uses that flaw to its advantage by creating a multidimensional image from a single snapshot.
So they're essentially getting multiple images for the price of one,
Exactly.
all thanks to chromatic aberration.
Exactly.
That's pretty clever.
But, even with the chromatic aberration hack, the information is still limited, and that's where AI steps onto the stage.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. So
Yeah.
walk me through how the AI works its magic.
Imagine you have a puzzle with a few missing pieces. You can often infer what should be in those missing pieces based on the surrounding context.
Okay.
Similarly, the AI model has been trained on millions of images and has learned to fill in the gaps in the phase information that they extract from that single image.
So they're using AI to enhance that image data.
Yeah.
But can you give me like a concrete example of what this AI-powered microscope can see?
In one test, they imaged red blood cells in a urine sample, and they could clearly make out that distinctive donut-like shape.
They could see the donut
They
shape.
could see the donut shape. It was very clear.
That's incredible.
Mm.
So while that donut-shaped visualization is impressive, I'm curious, could a conventional method achieve similar results, or is this truly a leap forward?
So they actually tried using a well-established computational QPI technique on the same sample,
Okay.
and it just couldn't match the level of detail achieved by the AI-powered method.
All
The
right.
AI was truly essential in unlocking that level of clarity.
Okay, so the AI is clearly adding something valuable here.
Yes.
But I'm also curious about the quality of the images themselves.
Yes.
The article mentioned something about cloud artifacts,
Right.
which sounds a little ominous.
Yeah, so that's another win for this new method because you see traditional computational QPI images often suffer from these cloud artifacts, these kind of blurry patches that obscure the details.
Mm.
The images generated by the AI-powered microscope were remarkably free of these artifacts, so they got a much cleaner view of the sample.
So clearer images, faster results, and no need for those messy dyes.
Yeah.
It sounds like this could really shake things up in the world of microscopy.
Yeah, it really could.
But I mean, how do we even begin to imagine the potential impact of all this?
That's exactly what we're going to unpack in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Get ready because things are about to get really exciting.
All right, I'm buckled up. All right. I am officially intrigued. We've established that this AI-powered microscope can see things traditional methods miss, and it can do it faster and with clearer results. But let's zoom out for a sec.
Yeah.
What does this actually mean for the world, beyond the lab?
Well, it is exciting to think about all the different ways this could be applied. Imagine a world where diagnosing diseases happens in minutes instead of days. Wow. Or where we can, develop materials with unheard of properties or even track the spread of pollutants in real time. This technology could really advance so many fields.
Yeah, you're painting a pretty compelling picture of the future here, but I think some listeners might still be struggling to grasp the specifics of, how this new approach compares to traditional methods.
Sure.
Can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. So imagine you're trying to read a really dense text and you need to highlight the key points to make sense of it all.
Right.
Traditional light microscopy often works in a similar way. It relies on staining or labeling techniques to visualize specific structures within a sample. So dyes or fluorescent markers are introduced. They attach to specific molecules or components.
So it's like using a highlighter to make certain parts stand out.
Exactly. But, this labeling process can be time-consuming and expensive, and more importantly, it can sometimes alter the very sample you're trying to study.
So it's like the highlighter is bleeding through the page and smudging the words.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And that's where QPI offers a really big advantage. Remember we talked about QPI analyzing how light waves are altered as they pass through a sample?
Right, like a song changing as it moves through different rooms.
Exactly. QPI leverages those subtle changes in light waves to reconstruct a detailed image of the sample's structure and composition, all without having to introduce those external labels.
So it gives us a clearer picture of the sample in its natural state.
Exactly.
But you mentioned earlier that, traditional QPI has its own limitations as well.
Right. Traditional QPI often requires multiple images taken at different focal planes to create a comprehensive picture. It's like trying to understand a 3D object by looking at a stack of 2D slices.
Yeah.
You need a lot of slices to get the full picture.
And that's where the chromatic aberration trick comes in, right?
Yes.
It's like a shortcut that lets you see all those slices at once.
Exactly. By cleverly exploiting the inherent chromatic aberration of microscope lenses, they've found a way to gather the information from a multi-focus image stack, all from a single snapshot.
That's really clever. But even with that shortcut, the information from a single image is still limited. How does AI step in to, fill in those gaps?
Okay, so think of those optical illusions where your brain fills in missing information based on the surrounding context. The AI model, trained on millions of images, works in a similar way. It learns to see those missing pieces in the phase information and create a more complete picture.
So the AI isn't just like enhancing the image, it's actually adding information.
Exactly.
Based on its training data. That's fascinating.
It is.
But I have to admit, I'm still a little wary of relying on AI to interpret something as crucial as medical images.
I understand your skepticism, but think of it this way. The AI is essentially acting as a highly skilled assistant, helping to analyze massive amounts of data and highlight patterns that might be missed by the human eye. It's not replacing human expertise, it's augmenting it.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be real. AI still has its flaws. We hear all these stories about AI bias and hallucinations where the AI is, creating details that aren't actually there.
Right.
How do we ensure that this technology is being used responsibly, especially in a field like healthcare?
Those are all very valid concerns, and, it's important to have safeguards in place. The key is rigorous testing and validation before this technology is used in real medical settings. It needs to undergo extensive trials to make sure it's accurate and reliable.
Right.
And just like any medical tool, human oversight and expert interpretation will always be essential.
So it's about finding the right balance.
Exactly.
Between AI and human expertise.
It is. This technology could change healthcare, but it's not a magic bullet. It's a tool. And when used responsibly, it can really help us see the world in a new light.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, the limitations of traditional microscopy, this new AI-powered approach, the responsible development of AI. But, what about the big picture? Where do we go from here? What are the applications of this that have you most excited?
That's a great question, and one that deserves its own deep dive. Get ready, because in the next part, we're going to explore just how much potential this technology has.
Okay, so we spent the last two parts getting into all the details of this AI-powered microscopy.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fascinating stuff, I have to say.
It really is.
But let's talk about where could this technology actually make a real difference? Like, what gets you excited about the potential here?
Well, the applications are pretty diverse and pretty mind-boggling, if I'm honest. But if I had to pick one area I'm really excited about, it's healthcare.
Oh, yeah, healthcare.
Imagine a world where a doctor could analyze a blood sample and diagnose an infection in minutes, not days.
Wow.
That's the kind of impact we're talking about.
That would be revolutionary. No more waiting anxiously for those lab results.
Absolutely.
But how would that even work, in practice?
Okay, so let's say a patient comes in with, symptoms of an infection.
Okay.
They take a small blood sample, analyze it using this AI-powered microscope. The AI has been trained on millions of images of healthy and infected blood cells.
Right.
And so it can quickly identify any abnormalities and provide a diagnosis almost instantly.
Wow, that speed could be life-saving, especially, in really critical situations.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just blood samples. This technology could also be really valuable for analyzing tissue biopsies, helping pathologists identify cancer cells much faster and with more precision.
Mm-hmm.
Early detection is so important for cancer treatment.
Yeah.
So this could really improve outcomes for patients.
That's amazing to think about. But, this level of technology usually comes at a pretty steep price.
Yeah.
I imagine these AI-powered microscopes are, pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Which could limit their accessibility.
That's a valid concern. And researchers are actually working on making this technology more affordable and more accessible, even in places with limited resources.
Right.
Imagine a portable AI-powered microscope that could be used in remote clinics or even out in the field.
Yeah.
It would really be a game changer.
Wow. Yeah. Democratizing access to that level of diagnostic power would be incredible.
Yeah.
But, you mentioned before that healthcare is just one area where this technology could have a huge impact.
Yeah.
What other fields are you keeping an eye on?
Another area I'm really intrigued by is material science.
Oh.
Imagine being able to analyze the structure of a material like in real time as it's being made.
Wow.
This technology could totally change how we develop new materials, leading to, stronger, lighter building materials, more efficient solar panels.
So we could be talking about creating entirely new materials with properties we can't even imagine yet.
Exactly. And it's not just about the materials themselves. Think about using this to monitor the structural integrity of bridges or airplanes, detecting tiny cracks or weaknesses before they become big problems.
Right.
The implications for safety and sustainability are huge.
It's really amazing to think about how an advancement in microscopy could have such a huge impact on so many different fields.
Yeah, it really shows how interconnected science and technology are. A breakthrough in one area can create all sorts of new possibilities in another.
So we've come a long way. We've talked about light waves, AI algorithms, a future full of possibilities, from healthcare to the materials we use. This technology has the potential to really change the world as we know it.
It's a powerful reminder that scientific discovery never really ends, and sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from looking at the world in a whole new way.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
We've seen how powerful it can be to combine physics and AI to unlock these hidden worlds. What other unexpected pairings could lead to the next breakthrough?
That's a great question.
What other mysteries are waiting to be uncovered? Keep asking questions, stay curious, and who knows what you might discover.